The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So President Donald Trump went to Puerto Rico yesterday. The horrifying disaster took place there. This was after Donald Trump responded to the mayor of San Juan's pleas for help to save lives with criticisms on Twitter and calling Puerto Rican people who want everything handed to them effectively lazy. Trump arrived in Puerto Rico yesterday, and he gave what is possibly the most insensitive and boneheaded speech we've seen him give so far. And that really says a lot from what we've seen in these first 8 or 9 months. He told Puerto Ricans that this, fortunately, wasn't a real catastrophe like Hurricane Katrina years ago, and that in the end, only 16 people died. And of course, he blamed Puerto Ricans for having to spend money on them. Of course, the death toll has since increased, sadly. I read the headline and I thought, has to be a fake article, right? It has to be The Onion or some kind of satire. But no, and we have video, of this abortion of a presidential visit to Puerto Rico. I would not allow kids to see this. Let's take a look.
Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine. We've saved a lot of lives. If you look at the, every death is a horror.
Of course.
But if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. Now, what is your death count as of this moment? 17?
16 certified.
16 people certified.
Right.
16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people, all of our people working together. 16 versus literally thousands of people.
Congratulations, only 16 people died. Everything is a penis size contest with Trump. Everything. He's comparing disasters like they're competitions of some kind. But is anybody really surprised? The guy bragged after 9/11 about having the tallest building in Lower Manhattan because the Twin Towers had been knocked down by terrorists. Now, Melania looks comatose, right? She looks like she's trying to stay as still as possible. Maybe if she doesn't move, she'll blend into the background, because this is just horrifying to anyone with any semblance of common sense. And the governor of Puerto Rico, sitting to Trump's right, we have a zoom in isolated on the moment that he moves into downright confusion. He looks like he's being held hostage by the worst torturer in the world. Check this out. We're going to zoom in on him and just look at his facial expression as Trump says these absolute atrocities.
If you look at the, every death is a horror. But if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody's ever seen anything like this.
Yeah. Look at his face. I mean, we have, I've been looking at this like it's the Zapruder film from the Kennedy assassination. Look at his face as Donald Trump is saying these things. It does seem like dementia, or I was thinking actually maybe persistent sleep deprivation. Trump's been bragging for decades about only sleeping 4 hours per night or so. If you've been doing that for 50 years, it's probably the equivalent of acting like you have the early, you're in the early stages of dementia. Trump is congratulating them on having had 16 people die. Not that it matters to Trump, but again, the death toll has increased. So this reminds me, there's a scene in Breaking Bad, one of my favorite TV shows, season 3, episode 1, where after there's a plane crash in the series, Walter White, played of course by Bryan Cranston, is speaking in the school gym of the school where he teaches, and he's sort of doing this exact same thing. He says something like, listen, neither of the two planes was full. It was what, like 2/3 or 3/4 full? It's really like the 50th worst airplane crash. It's tied for 50th. It's almost indistinguishable from the speech that Trump gave. At another moment, Trump showed up and started throwing paper towels to people like he was shooting free throws in basketball. A very bizarre video that we're showing you here. And just very strange. He's shooting them like he's shooting basketball free throws. And everything's just a competition. He seems totally lost. We're showing this video and it's just stunning. He can't relate to anyone. I mean, why didn't all these Puerto Ricans just fly away from the hurricane in their private helicopters? Nobody knows. No one's asking that question. Trump wonders. Trump also took the opportunity to talk about how great his staff have been. Shadows of George W. Bush's now infamous brownies doing a heck of a job during Katrina. Brock Long from FEMA. He's great. He's unbelievable, actually. I think the word is that Trump used. John Kelly, he's doing great. He's a former Marine. And at the briefing in Puerto Rico, Trump used these words to describe members of his administration who were in the room with him. A+, fantastic, unbelievable, great, amazing, and special. It's the Trump celebration trip. That's what it is. And this goes beyond just lack of compassion and total insensitivity. It's mind-blowing stupidity. When Trump opens his mouth, I imagine a cloud of the most vile, despicable ideas flowing out like air pollution. And you know who I really am feeling bad for? Imagine being a history teacher in 15 or 20 years and having to teach this garbage to our children. Imagine that job for a moment. And sometimes when I see a headline like Trump tells Puerto Ricans, at least it's not as bad as Katrina, I wish that this would end up being fake news because it's so horrible. But every single time it ends up being all too real. Let's talk a little bit about what happened and what is happening in Las Vegas. The fact that the victims of the Las Vegas shooting are running fundraising campaigns to cover their medical expense bills tells us everything we need to know about our depraved and disgusting healthcare system. Later on in the program today, I'll interview a professor of economics, Gerald Friedman, because he's known for having run the numbers on what a Medicare for all type proposal would cost. We're going to talk to him later. The fact that we even need to be donating money to the victims of the Las Vegas shooting, to the victims of Harvey and Irma and Maria, the government has enough cash for cabinet members to fly around on charter planes and for the president to bankrupt the Secret Service for protecting him and funneling millions of dollars into his golf courses for everything from room rentals to renting golf carts and whatever else. But the victims of the worst mass shooting in American history are running GoFundMe campaigns to try to pay for their own health insurance. What can we even do, right? I mean, it feels hopeless. And to some degree, yeah, we can donate a little money here and there to the victims, but we can't fix everything. And I saw an interesting tweet from Desirina Boscovich, who's a science writer. I wasn't familiar with her. She tweeted, "The GOP insists that the Vegas shooter's gun arsenal is a right, but medical treatment for his 500 plus survivors is merely a privilege." Now, she was criticized because it's not literally true. Some of the weapons that the shooter had were illegally possessed, but that doesn't change the broader reality, which is that too many Americans see the gun ownership as something that is a right that shouldn't be regulated, and healthcare as something that is equivalent to a new car. You might be able to buy the new car, you might not, but that's just kind of how things work in our society. This is not a sustainable path. And I know there are people who will say, listen, some people will have health care and some won't, and it won't affect me because I'm in the top 1% or the top 5% or 10 or 20% of our country. The impact of growing income and wealth inequality will affect you because it affects everybody. It increases crime, it increases strife, it increases the propensity to violence. And I've been getting emails from the audience asking, David, is this ever going to change without some kind of violence? Jerry Friedman today, we'll be talking to him about how single payer is affordable, period. But I don't think the right cares about that. They say that it's all a matter of financing and fiscal conservatism. But that's not true, because if it were, we could already have Medicare for all. It is about who deserves health care. That's the underlying issue. For many on the right, if you can't afford it, you don't deserve it. And that is a fundamental philosophical disagreement. Statistically, since we have hundreds of victims from the Las Vegas shooting, statistically speaking, there will probably be people who end up bankrupt as a result of having been shot by Stephen Paddock, period. How is it a moral country that allows that? And if you're a conservative in Nevada, if you're in the front row to this horror, and you see the stockpile of weapons and ammunition that Stephen Paddock had, and you see people you know, maybe it's people in your community, maybe it's friends, maybe it's even family, who have been victims of the shooting, and they are struggling just to afford health care, does that affect you at all, at least a little? How can you see that front and center and say, hey, this is the system we have. We don't need health care for all. And as I mentioned yesterday, you know, if it takes something like this happening in your backyard to change your mind, are you really that empathetic? And I know some people wrote to me and they said, David, yesterday I told you that there was a country music guitarist who said, the shooting changed my mind. And I said, that's great. It's great that it changed his mind. But it's disappointing that he lacked the empathy to understand why the gun laws needed to be changed and gun safety regulation needs to be changed without having been personally connected. That really is concerning to me. Now, because I'm making an effort to turn the show into a catalyst for action, there is a race in Nevada you can get involved with. And I guess it's sort of related to the incident. Any opportunity to tell you about races you can get involved in, I will take. Republican senatorial incumbent Dean Heller. I've told you about Dean Heller. He's the guy who, after getting a call from casino owners Steve Wynn and Sheldon Adelson in Nevada, changed his position on Trump Care 3.0 and supported it to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He has a Democratic challenger. Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Rosen is challenging Dean Heller in Nevada. Heller is horrible and fortunately is suffering a little bit because of those hiccups around the entire Trump Care 3.0 thing. Jackie Rosen supports affordable health care for every American. She supports properly funding public schools, supports protecting Social Security and Medicare, supports renewable energy, net neutrality, and DACA. 13 months until that election in November of 2018. Get involved, okay? I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We'll take a break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Jack Frazee. Jack, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. This is truly audience-sponsored, independent, non-corporate media. There are no dollars raining down on us from big corporate sponsors. Or I guess this isn't really the raining gesture. This is the sprinkling gesture, I guess. There's no money sprinkling down on us like freshly cracked black pepper. We do depend on funding from the audience, and you can support us at davidpakman.com/membership. You can go to patreon.com/davidpakmanshow, both great ways to support our work. And you can also, if you ever shop on amazon.com, stop by davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. That'll support us with every purchase you make. Much awaited, it is time for Hatriot Mail. Here is a reminder about what Hatriot Mail is.
Because we cling to our guns and our God, but somehow totally cool with a billionaire who wants to assault our wife. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, not much by way of an introduction in this week's Hatriot Mail, other than to say possibly the longest run-on sentence that we've ever received in Hatriot Mail.
Parkman's sock puppets, fake news lies. Who has their hand up your ass? DNC is KKK, invented by the Dems, 1865 and going strong. Antifa stormtroopers of the DNC, KKK, death to Antifa/DNC terror. Obama, KKK, ISIS, Muslim, take the red pill, and there goes our tax monies.
Now, the way that it was read by the voice of Hatriot Mail had some pauses that might imply to you that there was actually some punctuation, but not a single comma or period, arguably the longest run-on sentence in the history of Hatriot Mail. And all caps, by the way. That wasn't a touch that we added. We present these to you exactly as they come in. And the all caps hate mail, sort of the calling card of right-wing Hatriots. You can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. We've got a coupon code, which is Hatriot40. That will save you 40% off of your membership at davidpakman.com/membership, and it is spelled Hatriot 40. Give the middle finger to the Hatriots by using the coupon code Hatriot40. Okay, I've got a pretty big announcement to make, actually, in terms of upcoming new programming for the David Pakman Show. So the context of this is that, yes, since March 31st, 2017, the David Pakman Show is getting crushed by what is known as YouTube adpocalypse, aka YouTube demonetization. I've shown you the revenue curve for YouTube on the program before. We have it up on the screen right now for our TV and video audience. And as you can see, at the beginning, we started the year off strong. And then revenue just absolutely fell off of a cliff due to the YouTube demonetization crisis. Now, I've explained it before, and I don't want to bore the audience explaining exactly what this is again, but there have actually been a couple of articles written about what demonetization is and specifically how it's affecting our show. One really good article by Amanda Hess in the New York Times called How YouTube's Shifting Algorithms Hurt Independent Media. You can read about what's going on there. Another very good article written by Davey Alba in Wired Magazine called Want a Better Web? Here's an idea, pay for it. So what we've been doing, and I'm leading up to the big announcement, what we've been doing to try to recoup the lost revenue, number one, we have membership. People, if you've been listening or watching for a while, you probably know about membership. You sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. The prices are very reasonable. You get extra content. But if you want to pay less, you can do so with the coupon code IVoted17. Fine. People know about membership. We added Patreon. Patreon is similar to membership in that you make a contribution on a monthly basis to the show. We have similar benefits, the bonus show, the commercial-free TV show. You can do that at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Now, if you're watching with us, what you see on the screen here is that we have this goal of 2,000 patrons, right? When we reach 2,000 patrons, it's kind of a silly goal, but I've agreed to do an entire broadcast show from the studio with my hair, as I'm calling it, uncontrolled. And this is a pretty scary thing for really a lot of people, but particularly children, who this is really the stuff of nightmares. But that's kind of a joke, right? We'll get to 2,000 patrons someday, and I'll do a broadcast show with my hair like this. Here's the new thing that we're doing. Based on my offer to maybe look at putting my Boston College lectures up on YouTube or on the internet, we are going to be creating a new Patreon target, okay? And if you're saying, Boston College lectures, what are you talking about? I am now teaching as an adjunct professor at Boston College, and there is a lot in the class about media literacy and critical thinking and filter bubbles, echo chambers, and new media, talk media. And those lectures I've offered and said, what if we recreated those with the slides and did these long-form lectures on interesting subjects and put them online? People loved it. People have emailed, tweeted, posted to Facebook, YouTube, etc. Please do it. So I want to do it, but there are some significant tech requirements. Editing time, it's a whole thing, as I often like to say. So what I am proposing to you today is we have established a new Patreon target of 2,500, okay? When we have 2,500 patrons, we will produce and post these lectures first to the Patreon audience, but because it's important, we will after make them available for everybody on YouTube. I think it's really important, actually, that this material be available for everybody. If we're going to go through the trouble and time for producing it, I do want to make it available to everybody. But because it'll be triggered by our Patreon patrons, we will first make these lectures available through Patreon, okay? So, again, when we get to 2,000 patrons, we'll do the hair thing. I mentioned the hair thing, and we'll do the hair thing. I'll do an entire show from the broadcast studio with my hair out of control. But when we get to 2,500 patrons at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow, it will be time for Professor Pakman, for lack of a better term. And the great thing is, this won't be determined by how much you can pledge. I'm not saying once we raise X number of dollars. I'm saying once we get 2,500 contributors, we will produce the full semester of critical thinking, media literacy, etc. lectures from the college course I am teaching at Boston College. So $1 contribution counts the same as a $100 contribution towards that 2,500 contributor goal. I think it's a great thing. Help us out. Let's do it. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I was really going back and forth about whether to mention this, because the argument could be made that by talking about what I'm about to talk about, I am propping up or giving exposure to ideas that should be kept totally out of the public debate. But I think what I'm about to share with you is so pernicious, so dangerous, that it's actually important to be aware that it's going on because of how vile it is. Alt-right conspiracy theorist Alex Jones of Infowars fame claimed on a recent broadcast that the shooting in Las Vegas, the biggest mass shooting in American history, was perpetrated by someone who was connected to, a member of, or in cahoots with Antifa, the left-wing anti-fascist movement. Here is a clip from Alex Jones's program.
The news is lying. FBI HRT did the hit on the guy, and they found Antifa information in the room and photos of the woman in the Middle East. So he did not kill himself. The FBI hostage rescue team killed him because he was firing on them. So he did not want to be taken alive, and reportedly he did it. And it was Antifa crap everywhere. And other things I'm not supposed to mention. That is directly from the hostage rescue team.
Vile, disgusting, but completely predictable. Completely predictable. There were others also posting similarly deranged ideas. An anonymous anti-Semitic account posted a picture of the shooter and wrote that he was a left-wing, anti-Trump, Antifa Democrat. In the same, in a reply, that same user wrote that Paddock looks like a Jew. That was retweeted 1,800 times as of yesterday. Another Twitter user tried linking Paddock, the shooter, to former President Barack Obama, as well as Antifa. Stephen Paddock, apparently representing the retired, plane-owning, wealthy wing of Antifa, if you are to believe this. We have a really, really disturbed Trumpist who has been watching our show for a long time. Now, this isn't a troll. We know for a variety of reasons. I'm just going to identify her by her first name of Colleen. She sent a series of emails in the last couple of days, but the gist of it is she thinks it's a false flag. As she wrote, responding to our coverage of the Vegas shooting, another false flag, look into it, all done to take guns away. Note that nobody is saying Trump wants to take guns away. That is proof that it doesn't matter what happens. These people will say this. Under Obama, they were all false flag shootings that Obama was involved in to take guns away. Of course, no guns were actually taken away. Record gun sales under Obama. Under Trump, they're also false flags to take guns away, but now it's some other entity that's perpetrating the false flags. Trump isn't involved because he's not the guy trying to take guns away. This is the sick nature of it, right? And if we point this out, we hear that, oh no, but David, that's part of the destruction. The deep state or whoever, with the Illuminati, the Trilateral Commission, Bilderbergs, I don't even know who it is at this point. They do the same thing under Republican and Democratic administrations because that's how you create plausible deniability. If you say to Jones, Alex Jones, Alex, no one else is corroborating what you supposedly have been told, he will say, well, that's because my contact is the only person actually telling the truth. So the common thread going through all these conspiracy theorists is that the beliefs are unfalsifiable. If you ask the defeasibility question, right? Okay, I've heard your hypothesis. What would change your mind? What would make you believe that you're wrong? You will not get an answer. They believe that they have already figured out that they are correct. So we can't work with these people, right? We can't work with people who believe this stuff to improve the country. I've said it before, we need to work around them. We need to be working on get out the vote. We need to be circumventing these people because they are pulled into this stuff in such a way that either, you know, if it's Alex Jones, I still believe that part of it is just profit motive. Again, I'm not saying this to defend Jones. I think that even pretending to have these ideas is dangerous. When I met him, he seemed like he played a character, like the conspiracy stuff is a character to make money. Maybe it's not. Either way, it's not a defense of Jones. But for a lot of his cronies or the people that follow him, this stuff is very, very real. So we cannot work with these people. And this is something that somehow, some way has to be rooted out, or at least become so marginalized that its impact is effectively zero. And sadly, right now, the impact and influence of this type of garbage is more than zero, and we need to be aware of it, and we're going to have to work around it together. And there's a discussion happening on our Reddit discussion forum, actually, about this right now, and you can participate in that at davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Gerald Friedman, professor of economics at my undergraduate alma mater of the University of Massachusetts. Jerry, we've spoken before about your detailed analyses of the costs and benefits to a Medicare-for-all or other single-payer type healthcare system in the United States. We now have Bernie Sanders's 2017 Medicare-for-all proposal. So what better time than now to actually talk about what such a system would cost? Now, you see the detractors of these systems say, big tax increase, incredibly expensive. It's more promising of free stuff that's not really free. The counter to that would be that it would save much more money than it would cost. So top line, how do we start thinking about those numbers?
Okay, well, the first thing to do is to think about there are actually three different numbers. The first number is what a Medicare for all system would do for the entire U.S. economy versus what we have now. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, there are big numbers involved. What we have now are big numbers. 18% of our gross domestic product, 18 cents of every dollar that we produce in this country goes for healthcare now. Our Medicare for all system would lower that. We would be able to get the same health care for less money. And this is a point on which I think there is almost no disagreement. Critics will admit that, yeah, it would save money on the current healthcare system. It's almost impossible to argue otherwise because Medicare is a more efficient bill payer than the current insurance systems, private health insurance. Medicare doesn't involve the type of marketing or profits that are involved in the current system. Medicare saves money for providers because it's easier for providers to bill a single system than to bill the dozens of insurance companies and hundreds of insurance plans in an average American state. To give you just one quick, easy example to show this, in Toronto General Hospital in Ontario, Canada, with a single payer system, there are two people who do billing in that hospital. Massachusetts General Hospital is about the same size, the same number of beds, more or less, same number of patients. There are 450 people who do billing there. I mean, so you go and save money.
Yeah. Now, what about there's an argument that part of the savings would be because if you have a single payer, they could force providers to just have to charge less, and thus it would significantly depress wages within the medical infrastructure for doctors and nurses. How do you respond to that?
Well, not particularly for doctors and nurses. Now, they would pay providers less because providers would have lower costs because of this the saving on the billing process. Mm-hmm. And there are some providers who currently are earning what economists call rents, which is a situation where you have a monopoly and you exploit everybody else. The biggest rents are in the pharmaceutical sector. You have this hepatitis C pill that sells, a course of treatments costs $85,000 in the United States. It costs, no joke, $200 in India. So they are exploiting the rest of us. And the research for that, as for most drugs, is paid for in the first place by the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. So we already paid for this drug, and then we're paying again. So in my estimates for Medicare for All, you'd be saving large sums on bargaining effectively for drugs. And there are also some elite hospitals that would be facing cuts, but not that much. Medicare currently pays hospitals about 22% less than what hospitals get from private insurance companies. That's overall. Now, that is about my estimate. It's a little more than but it's close to my estimate of the administrative savings from single payer. So, yeah, so the hospitals, some hospitals like Mass General would probably get a bit less because they are currently exploiting the rest of us to some extent. There's abundant evidence on this. But overall, hospitals would be a wash, doctors would be a wash. Doctors would actually benefit. Those doctors who currently treat Medicaid patients would get a raise. So overall, we would achieve savings of maybe $600 billion or so on our total healthcare spending. And those savings would largely come from being more efficient, doing the same stuff better.
So along those lines, there was an analysis done of the proposal that Bernie Sanders had during the campaign, right? So this is not the most recent proposal, but from the one during his campaign. And it estimated that the cost to people who are earning salaries, wage earners, would be about a 2.2% surcharge, which I estimated on someone earning $50,000 would be about $1,200 or $1,300 roughly. Can you talk a little bit about, in the analyses you've run, sort of what would be the costs to different parties?
Okay, well, there we get to the second and third questions. The first question is the total economy. The second question is the federal government. And yes, there would be a tax increase. That 2.2% was actually what Bernie was proposing last year, plus some payroll tax. There would be the federal government would be spending more and taxing more, but that would be replacing what we're already spending on taxes that go to private bodies. When we buy health insurance, it's mandated by the government. We have to buy health insurance. And we have to pay for health insurance premiums. To me and to the Supreme Court, that means it's a tax. It's just a tax collected by private agencies. Now, the third question is for the individuals. Who would be paying more, who would be paying less? Because overall, we'll be paying less in public taxes to the government than in private taxes to health insurance companies, because the whole system will be more efficient. But there'll also be particular savings for some people, because in Bernie's proposal and in the proposals that I've written, we have an element of an income tax, or a tax related to how much money you have and how much you can afford to pay. Whereas now your health insurance premium is either a lump sum, everybody pays the same, or sick people or people in families with a sick family member pay more. So we put a tax on sickness, which is a double tax in effect, because if you're sick or you have a family member who's sick, your earning capacity goes down because you're spending time taking care of your family member, or that family member can't have a job because they have a disability, whatever. And then on top of that, you have to pay this extra health insurance because the health insurance figures out that you're sick, and they get you into a plan that covers sick people. I mean, they have to sell you insurance and they can't charge you extra for pre-existing conditions, but they work it.
Well, that relates to this idea of everybody with pre-existing conditions under Trump Care versions 1, 2, and 3.0, all of which so far failed, would have access to a plan regardless of pre-existing conditions. But that's very different than it being affordable, and it sounds like that's sort of what you're getting at.
Yes, what we already have is something in that direction, but there are real limits on it. Whereas what they were proposing, access, that's just a I would use a word that you can't put on television or commercial television or radio. But, you know, access just means they have to offer you a plan. But they could offer it at $80,000, $150,000. I mean, you know, and then, okay, you have access. You can buy it if you could afford it. And who could afford that?
And so you and I have been talking about a single payer system. And are you experiencing that there are people who are confused, understandably so, not as a criticism, between a single payer system, where the government would be the one payer, versus nationalizing healthcare, where the government runs and operates the hospitals and employs the doctors and nurses? Do you see as much confusion about that as I'm seeing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's and that confusion is promoted by critics who say we're going to have a government takeover of health insurance. No, we're going to have a government provision of health insurance for people. If you want to buy health insurance on your own, this isn't in Bernie's plan, but it's in a lot of the plans that I envision, then yeah, you could buy health insurance. Why somebody would do that, I don't know, because they would already be getting it through the government for free, in effect, because they'd already be paying the taxes. But there would not be a government takeover of the provision of health care. Britain has that.
Right.
And arguably, the healthcare system in the United Kingdom is the best in the world. Government provision of healthcare through the National Health Service is extraordinarily efficient and delivers very good care. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about something like Canada, where they have private provision of healthcare. Doctors work independently, hospitals are run independently, but there is government finance. So all the bills go to a government agency. If you go to a doctor in Canada, billing amounts to the following. You swipe a card through their machine. The doctor or the nurse types in the diagnostic code and the treatment code, and you're done. That's it. The government agency will send a check for your services to the doctor. The doctor deposits that check in her private bank account. All done. That's it.
Jerry, what is the best place for people to be able to check out your detailed proposals of how this would all work financially and economically?
Well, one place would be Physicians for National Health Plan, pnhp.org. My 2013 financing proposal is up there. And there's a wealth of good information there, top quality research on the Canadian healthcare system, foreign healthcare systems, issues in the United States healthcare system. There's some of my work is up there, and there's a lot of work by other excellent scholars. Also, another very good place for healthcare in general is the Kaiser Family Foundation, kff.org, and finally, the CommonwealthFund.org. My most recent published work on single payer was from 2015 for New York, and that is, if you Google New York Health Plan, I don't remember the website.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right.
Also, you can always write to me.
Absolutely. Yes. And people, I'm sure, will find how to do that. We've been speaking with UMass Professor of Economics, Gerald Friedman. Always great to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Remember over the summer when I told you that there were rumblings of the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson resignation? That was true, apparently. And we now know more about the context and also about why it allegedly didn't happen. This is a fascinating leak, which, just to be totally upfront, is being 100% denied by Donald Trump at this point. According to NBC News, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was openly calling President Trump a moron after a July 20th meeting at the Pentagon, according to multiple senior Trump administration officials. Rex Tillerson reportedly called Trump a moron in front of members of the entire national security team, as well as cabinet members. 3 senior officials said to NBC, imagine being a fly on the wall for that one, right? So he called Trump a moron. We were hearing rumblings of a resignation. Why didn't the resignation of Rex Tillerson happen? Apparently, Vice President Mike Pence talked him out of it. Pence is also denying that this report is true. The Boy Scout speech debacle played a role, according to this report. Tillerson was once a leader of the Boy Scouts of America. And apparently, when Donald Trump showed up and gave that bizarre, rambling, embarrassing political speech to the Boy Scouts, it was sort of a high point in the tensions between Tillerson and Trump. And exactly as always happens after these reports, the White House initially declines to comment, but then Trump goes out on Twitter and says the entire thing is fake. You know, I have a hard time believing the denials. I have a really hard time believing the denials. And Rex Tillerson spoke this morning, and while he reaffirmed his commitment to the job, which means nothing, by the way, he did not deny having called Donald Trump a moron. And you'll remember that incident where Rex Tillerson was asked about the impact of Donald Trump's tweets or comments. And Tillerson said something along the lines of, "President speaks for himself." That is an indication that things are not going particularly well between the Secretary of State and the president. Are things going better now? It's unclear. Clearly, Tillerson didn't resign. Today, he said that he is committed to the job. But looking at Trump's recent tweets, there's every indication that there is still tension. I mean, just in the last couple of days, Donald Trump tweeted in the midst of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson saying he thought he was making headway with North Korea. Trump tweeted, "I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man. Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done." This might seem minor, but think about what it means. Tillerson said publicly that he was making headway with North Korea not long ago. Really important job for the Secretary of State, right? Try to de-escalate potentially nuclear-involved crises with an unfriendly nation. And Trump goes public and says, I told Rex not even to bother with this entire thing. Tillerson is a greedy oligarch with ties to Russia, but he's not a moron, right? And he's clearly aware of the utter disaster that is the Trump administration when it comes to foreign policy and international diplomacy, which directly impacts Tillerson as Secretary of State. Again, Tillerson says, "I reaffirm my commitment to the role." That's like when Trump says he has full confidence in someone and 2 days later they end up fired or forced to resign. So I've been saying the next to go is going to be Steven Mnuchin for the similar travel type stuff that Tom Price ultimately resigned over, or maybe Jared Kushner for the endless covering up of foreign contacts and private email addresses. Maybe Tillerson could be next, either by resignation or by firing. And if that were to happen, it's a major, major incident, right? Having a Secretary of State resign or be fired in the first 9 months of an administration is bad enough. Having your Secretary of State resign or be fired after a dozen, 20, 24 prominent people in your administration have already been fired or resigned, it's the exact type of embarrassing chaos that Russia would want to foment in the United States if they were actually involved in the 2016 election, which, of course, every indication is that they were. Another one of these so-called pro-life, anti-abortion Republicans has now been caught urging his mistress, who he thought had been impregnated by him, to have an abortion. Other people shouldn't have the choice of an abortion, according to Tim Murphy. But his mistress and he really should have that choice. I'm talking of U.S. Republican Congressman Tim Murphy. He had an affair with Shannon Edwards, forensic psychologist in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Murphy has already admitted to the affair, or to the relationship, I guess is what they're calling it. He didn't actually get her pregnant, but they had a pregnancy scare where they thought maybe she's pregnant. And in January, text messages that leaked and were obtained by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette indicated that it appeared that Tim Murphy, while publicly against legal abortion, tried to get his mistress to have an abortion, or would have if the pregnancy had been real. His office's Facebook account had posted an anti-abortion message, and after that, he had the following text exchange with Shannon Edwards, where she said, quote, "And you have zero issue posting your pro-life stance all over the place when you had no issue asking me to abort our unborn child just last week when we thought that was one of the options. To which Tim Murphy replied, I get what you say about my March for Life messages. I've never written them. Staff does them. I read them and winced. I told staff, don't write anymore. I will. The anti-abortion hard right Family Research Council loves this guy. LifePak, which is against abortion, endorsed Tim Murphy. He's part of the House pro-life caucus. He's one of those pro-life, unless I want to force a woman to have an abortion type of guys. Here are some of the votes that Tim Murphy has cast. He voted yes on banning federal health coverage that includes abortion. He voted yes on making it a crime to harm a fetus during another crime. He voted yes to ban funding for abortion under federal Obamacare plans. He voted yes to prohibit federal funding for abortion. He voted to prohibit federal funding to groups like Planned Parenthood. He voted for no family planning assistance that includes abortion. He voted to include preborn human beings in 14th Amendment protection. He voted for a permanent ban on the use of federal funds for abortion or health coverage that includes abortions. And very recently, he co-sponsored and voted yes on the most recent version of the 20-week abortion ban. But he was right there telling his mistress, what about an abortion? That might be a good idea. Which are the family values? The being for abortion when it suits him, or the having the affair, or the telling women when it might be a good idea for them to get abortions? And as a total aside, he admits in the texts that he's not writing the anti-abortion nonsense that his staff posts to Facebook. He's admitting, I mean, it's so minor in the grand scheme of things. He's admitting that those messages are just political posturing. The only moral abortion, apparently, for Tim Murphy is his own mistress's abortion. But hey, this is an honorable and distinguished member of the House of Representatives. He's not going to be held to the same standard as poor people and others. It is a Republican congressman. When they need abortions, it is totally different from when random people need abortions, I guess in his world. Pathetic clowns. Hypocrisy and double standard doesn't even come close to describing what these people are advocating and then doing in their private lives. Just absolutely disgusting. We have a voicemail from the Eggman, a convicted felon, former convicted felon, weighing in on the entire convicted felons voting thing that came up on the show earlier this week. Take a listen to the Eggman here.
Hey, Dave. I don't know why people still think convicted felons can't vote. I am a convicted felon. I'm a registered voter in my state here. I did register as a Republican when I got out of prison just because I want to stay under the radar. That's a joke, but it's actually true. Anyway, Dave, I also want to say the crazy thing is here that you can be a convicted felon and run for public office, but you can't be a convicted felon and have a load of available jobs. I apply for jobs all the time, and I know that having my felony conviction on there is going to keep me from getting that job. I could run for office, though, and legislate, but I can't work at a fucking bank or an office or some bullshit because, you know, I robbed a bank once. You know, big deal. Made a mistake. So felons can vote. We just can't get jobs.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so it is interesting that it would be more difficult to become an aide to a congressman than to be elected the congressman based on having a felony conviction on your record. And yes, it's true. There's a number of different laws depending on the state. In some states, as soon as you are out of prison, you have your voting rights reinstated. In some, you have your voting rights reinstated when parole or probation have expired. In others, you have to request that your voting rights be reinstated, but it is true that there is a patchwork of laws, different laws in different states, and convicted felons can ultimately regain the right to vote. On the bonus show today, the White House is thinking about whether it makes sense to end Social Security numbers as a sort of default national ID. Very interesting discussion we're going to have. The ACLU is also suing to increase access to the abortion pill, medical abortions, medication abortions. And we will talk about, and excuse me if you're listening during lunch, cow farts are an even bigger problem than we thought. And we will talk about not only a recent study about that, but also some new developments in terms of mitigating methane emissions from our bovine friends, as I like to call them. All of those stories and more on the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership to sign up, as well as patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Both Patreon and membership now can give you access to both the bonus show and the commercial-free All Access Pass, which includes audio and video streams of the entire broadcast show just for you. Patreon.com/davidpakmanshow, davidpakman.com/membership. We will speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.